How's it going with you?
Going all right. How's it going with you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Hey, thank you for talking to us about this documentary, what, Born to Play?
Born to play.
So tell us how this originated.
I mean, the doc itself originated because when I was in grad school, well, let's just long story short from the beginning, I've always been a huge women's sports fan my whole life. And obviously I grew up wanting to make, not obviously, but I grew up wanting to make movies, and that was kind of what I always dreamed of doing, telling a story of a bunch of women athletes. And I thought, oh man, maybe I'll write, a league of their own, or I'll write my own version of these sports movies. And then about 8 years ago, I got into documentary filmmaking, mainly as an editor of feature docs. And someone asked me what my dream film would be if I ever directed my own. And I was like, oh, easy. I'd find a women's team and spend a season with them. And then somebody clued me in that women's football was happening across the country, and there was a league and 70 plus teams. I mean, they were everywhere. And I am originally from Boston, and I'm a diehard everything Boston fan. So I was like, well, of course, the dream would be Boston. And I pretty much cold called the team. I mean, I literally just wrote info at Boston Renegades and made my passionate pitch for how I would tell the story and what I wanted to do. And of course, I had to build that trust, and they vetted me, but I did. They let me in, and then it was an incredible experience from there. So it was a blend of both the passion to make a movie about that, and I also spent grad school writing about representations of female athletes in cinema, whether they're empowered or not, from the 40s to today. So that work, that writing work, kind of combined with my experience in documentary, led me to kind of use all the skills I had grown over the past decade into this film. And the Boston Renegades, I was just very lucky. I was lucky they let me in.
That's impressive. I mean, personally, I never heard of a female football league. I mean, it must have quite been a surprise or shock to you.
I mean, it wasn't a shock to me that women played football. The established league was a shock to me. Like, I think that we've heard of random girls playing in Pee Wee and playing, through the ranks, or that like one girl who was a kicker in a high school, and I know that women want to play football. Like, I had friends who played rugby and, flag football and stuff like that. But I had no idea that there was this established league with 70 plus teams in every major city. And when you're watching it, the games are so exciting. I mean, if you think you were watching the NFL, I mean, they're so well organized, and their staff and their rosters are so deep, and they're just this well-oiled machine. And it was really incredible to step into that world. I got so whipped up, I almost forgot people don't know about it. Because every time I would tell someone, oh, I'm filming with the Boston Renegades. Who? The Boston Renegades? Who's that? Oh, it's a women's, semi-professional soccer. What? Women play football? So in a lot of ways, I did, for a minute when I was filming, kind of get captured in the magic bubble that they have created. And then when I came back, I live in New York, so I was driving all the way up to Boston every week to shoot this. And when I came back to New York, everybody would be like, what are you talking about? And that was mind-blowing, because when you think about, the major sports institutions in our country, I'm talking about football, baseball, hockey, and basketball, I think the familiarity of women playing the rest of them has somewhat caught up. I mean, we have the WNBA. Our women's hockey team dominates at the Olympics, and there's a professional women's hockey league now. And there have been women playing baseball for a long time. They haven't been in the major leagues, but obviously softball is a very established sport, and a lot of them go and do that. But football felt like the untouched landscape for women playing it. And it never had anything to do with, I mean, it does have something to do with, obviously deep-rooted conversations of women's sports and what people think women are capable of. But what's interesting and what I loved is when I was with the team, they were very hell-bent on the idea that it wasn't about, them wanting to play with the men. It wasn't about women's football versus men's football. They just want their own. They're just like, if their men play football, women should be able to play football. And that makes sense. And I think a lot of folks are like, well, are there enough girls and women out there that would be interested? And you're kind of like, it's the chicken and egg thing. I think if women knew it was an option, the ones that want to play would be playing. But I think women have never even known it was. So a part of telling the story was not only showing how great the team is, but also showing that it's happening and it's an option for women to play.
I'm actually surprised that it took very little convincing to film the Boston Renegades, or was it really difficult?
Okay, it wasn't very easy. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it was very. What was easy was accessing them, which was surprising to me. A team of that caliber and at that level, I felt like I should have had to go through a lot of barriers, as if it was going to like an NFL team, where there would be like this foundation of the PR person and the marketing and then vetted by the owner. Like I really thought that was going to happen. And instead I was able to reach them we did a call, we did an email, a large email thread. They did their research on me, and then I was sitting in the owner's kitchen and we were having a conversation, and she had other people in her life who were filmmakers who she had talked to me to kind of make sure I was legit. So there was a vetting process. But that said, I think that the hardest part of it was convincing them that I was coming into it to honor them and their sport, and I wasn't kind of having a secret agenda to sensationalize it or kind of make a hook or make it a reality show exploitative thing. I was like, no, I'm here to just honor a group of athletes. And there have been docs about women's football, and there have been they've been approached by other people who want to kind of broadcast, but it always felt very sensationalized. And I think that I was able to bring them in, obviously, because I had done so much writing about representations of female athletes. I think they realized that I was there for the right reasons, and that was something they were really concerned about at first. And then that was the biggest way I grew their trust.
Since you brought it up, since there were other female documentaries about football, how did you want to make this one different and call it your own?
I mean, the biggest thing I wanted to do different was the way I wanted to film it, because I didn't know what the story was going to be, and I didn't know who the characters were going to be. So the first thing that was kind of high priority for me was that I wanted to give them basically as epic of a cinematic treatment as I could, that their male counterparts have been getting for decades. So very homage to NFL films, slow motion, widescreen, the detail of the game, and to find something that felt really rich in narrative and not kind of, documentaries. I've worked in documentaries for a long time, and they have obviously different approaches, serve different purposes. But sometimes documentaries can feel kind of flat and just educational. And I wanted it to feel kind of rich and like a classic sports film. And the other docs I've seen of women's football are wonderful. And they obviously touch on not all, I mean, they're hit or miss, but there are some ones that are doing the work. There just hasn't been someone that's kind of put such a lens on it that feels so cinematic. I feel like they've been very kind of TV and also, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, they're observational, but they do feel like they've always been like, wow, women can play football. And the biggest thing to me was that I didn't want that to be the lens. Mm-hmm. I wanted the lens of the film to be about a group of athletes with a common goal, and they just happen to be women. And of course things would emerge naturally in the interviews when they have to discuss their path to get to the game, because there's, this black void of a path in middle school and high school. Like you can play with as a kid, but it's not until you're 18 or out of college that you can now join the league. So there is those things would naturally emerge, or the resources that they have to pay to play, or the concept of how many coaches they can have and putting in the time and who can be there. So those things were going to happen because they're facts. But by no means was I going to open this film and be like, did you know? It was just going to be like, here it is. And, and at the end of the film, of course there is a statement that's saying that they are, they are breaking barriers, and it's great. But that is an earned space. That is the first I want to whip you in the frenzy, where you almost forget you didn't know women play football, because it just feels so natural in these common, not tropes, but the archetypes in, putting in the work. We lost a game. Rah, we got to get back. How are we going to make this work? How do we survive? How do we come together when we're pulled apart? And, some of those classic epic storylines I wanted to, because they all happen. that's genderless. You know, I mean, like that's just
Really.
sports. So I think that I don't know if it's so much about different than the other films as the craft of telling a story of them as pure athletes and not letting it even remotely tiptoe into a hook about them being women specifically.
Now, there's one thing about convincing the team for you to film, but convincing the athletes too, isn't that also a challenge? I mean, how did you decide which athlete story to actually follow?
Oh yeah, the primary players that are featured in the film were probably some of the least eager to be on camera because they just wanted to play. You know, they're like, I don't want to be distracted, from the game, and I just want to focus on that because that's why I'm here. You know, is to play and not be in a film or something. But so it was. There were no players that kind of were just like camera hungry, but there were some players who let me in that helped me build the trust with other players. But Allison Cahill and Shantae Bonds, who are two of the featured players in the film, I mean, Allison Cahill is a legend in the sport. She has all of these MVPs and all-star, this history, this storied history, and the first woman to reach 100 wins in women's football. There's just like so much to her, and you could feel it. Like when I met her, and the team was like, "You're never gonna get her." Like it's not gonna happen. And luckily, halfway through the season, I had some opportunities to talk to her, and I was able to tell her why I'm there and what I'm trying to do. And I was very grateful that she let me in, but I did not know the characters when I started filming. I thought I will just film the team and they will emerge. And both her and Shantae of that specific season ended up being such influential players. They were captains and MVPs and they were just running the show. And so that was natural. But the team, I think once the owner introduced me and, said how great this could be for them and the sport, most of the team did reach out and were like, tell us how we can help. And it was all in different capacities. But it was intimidating to stand there in front of, 40 women in all their gear, just being like, oh yeah, what are you really here for? And like, how is this going to look? And I'm very, very proud of how much they enjoyed the film and how proud they are of being a part of it. So it worked out in the long run, but it took some time and to stay out of their way.
Absolutely.
I mean, while they were playing, and there's certainly some good bloopers of me in the editing bay almost falling over on my camera and all of this. But I think one of the funniest things was that when I started filming, one of their fears was that I was going to somehow leak strategies of their game. And I was like, that is not what I'm here for at all. I mean, I'd be filming them in a huddle talking, and then they'd be like, oh, wait, Viri's here. Like, shh, hold on. I was like, you guys, that's not what I'm here for. And so I think now it almost took all the way to the end for them to realize that I wasn't here to leak their plays to a rival.
Yeah. When did you started filming? What year is this, and how long did it? How long or how many seasons that took for your production?
I filmed the 2018 season. They do tryouts and practices in the fall, and then they start real practices indoor in January, and then the season kicks off in April. So they're outside in March, and I met the team in like February or March. I was out on the field filming with them by mid-March, and then I followed them all the way through the championship into the fall. I filmed until like September. So it was like March through September. And then I went back and continued to film the start of their next season. But it was clear that the story I had gotten was complete and great. And I kind of used some of that footage of the next season just to help them, create some material for themselves. But it was basically a year. And I, obviously I had to go back and pick up some stuff. But that whole season, that run of that season was wild because you just never know when it's going to end. Once they get to playoffs, it's win or go home. So every time they hit a round, I'd be sitting in the hotel with my DP and would be like, maybe this is it. Like, I mean, even if it had been it, I think the film would have ended how it ended, despite however their season ended competitively, in the sense of, the honor of what they're actually doing. But for them, they were not going to be satisfied unless they won. So it was wild to kind of be on that ride with them.
Honestly, I was amazed that you filmed a championship season. I don't know. I thought you filmed it over several seasons until they hit a championship, but
Yeah.
it sounded like you struck gold.
I mean, that was the wild thing. I didn't like, so they had gone undefeated but lost in their championship the year before. And I knew that I didn't know if they'd go back or win it, because that can either drive you or break you, the concept of that. And when we started the season, I was like, oh, I mean, they were doing great. They won. It was like competitive, but they were winning. And then they had their first loss, and I was like, all right, okay. And then their second loss, and all of a sudden it was like, well, now they have to go on the road for the playoffs, and no one's ever won going on the road, and it was, and I surrendered. I surrendered to the process, and finally, because I could never have known, and I was always filming in my brain with a win or a loss outcome. I was like, well, if they lose the whole time, then you're like even more of the question of what is the incentive to play, And if they win the whole time, then it's like the incredible golden medal of wow, lucky. And I do feel very lucky, especially because that season did feel so competitive. They are a very dominant team now. They're very hard to beat. So I definitely captured a season where they were tested, and so was I. I mean, in what I thought was going to happen. But there was a great moment in an interview with Al. It's not in the film, but she was just like, "We don't know how the story's going to." It was after their second loss, and she's like, "We don't know how the story's going to end. You don't know. We don't know." I'm like, "I know." And now I think about it, and I'm like, "Oh." That was you see it once in a while. You see a doc with something like that happening. I never thought it would happen to me. It was wild.
I like the fact that it's sort of like a limited budget ragtag team where they had to do fundraisers, but I'm sure you had to come up with a limited budget your own and tag along. Talk about the challenges of filming a documentary over multiple cities.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this documentary was self-funded. I was editing 2 other features in the hotels overnight while I was filming all day. I mean, I used my work to pay for this work. I had a wonderful company called Perk Pictures who came on that gave me a little bit of startup fund for some sound guys for the games. But ultimately, it was me just hustling. And my DP, thank God, is one of my best friends. And we would get in the car and we'd road trip. And, I spent a lot of time up in Boston alone, but then we would drive to Pittsburgh, which was like an 11-hour drive or something. And then we'd be down in DC. And then it was all the Northeast, thankfully. And then we obviously flew to Atlanta. But it was, yeah. And we started the film staying in Airbnbs. We thought, oh, this will be cheap. We'll do this. And it had some interesting stories from that. Which were weird. And then we started just staying in these like low budget hotels. I mean, it was hilarious. It was so indie. We were ragtag as well. Although the good news was that we had great equipment, and we both had been kind of, in a lot of ways, training for this in all of our career, and working on other people's films. So we both were so amped and ready that all that stuff would just make us laugh along the way. We just made it work. And I had a lot of friends who came along and, would be running water bottles to us and granola bars while we were there. But it was fun. And, we didn't know all of their, rituals and all their traditions right away, because we just kind of let in and the season was starting right away. So we'd be standing places and things would just happen. Like we were in the locker room, the whole film opens up with them banging on the lockers. We didn't know that was going to happen. We were both standing in there, and then we were like, what is happening? And we're just filming it. And so there was so much exploration as we filmed, and so many funny, cheap meals, cheap hotels that we still laugh about today. But it looks, we're very happy with how it all came out, of course.
Yeah. When I was actually watching the film, and I completely forgot I was watching like a female football team. It just seemed like a football team with all the traditions, all the lingo, all the talk that they actually do. But I think you did a really good job on that.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was the goal. The one thing I knew I wanted going into the film was to generate positive representation and visibility of women playing football, as football athletes. I mean, it was like the one thing I knew at bare minimum was that I was going to create a familiar lane of sports storytelling, giving it to something that you've kind of never gotten to see that quality in before. So I knew that. But then when all of the highs and the lows started to happen, I mean, that's the stuff that's just natural that you that you just have to like let go and enjoy the ride. And so that I was very grateful for that. And I think a part of getting lost in getting whipped up in the frenzy of seeing them and almost forgetting that that's something special is because it's very familiar. I mean, the core of sports is not gendered. Like we were saying, Al once said to me, she's like, there's nothing gendered about throwing a football. There's nothing gendered about running down a field. It's like the sport is the sport. And so are the twists and the turns of being on a team, So it's very cool to hear because that was the goal.
Now, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe your documentary premiered on ESPN, right? And
Yes.
you must have been very pleased and surprised that you got your documentary to premiere on the king of all sports networks.
I mean, yeah, that was the dream. I had edited a few feature docs that were on HBO and that had been on some other platforms, but I remember thinking, no, the dream for this film has got to be something sports related, but I didn't know what it would be. And I certainly never thought it would be ESPN. I mean, these women grew up watching ESPN and still do for everything sports. So that was probably what moved me the most. Like the idea that they got to see themselves on ESPN prime time was wild. And to this day, a lot of the players say it was the most significant moment in their football career, which is just mind blowing to me. And they've won championships and everything. But that was it, to be recognized on that channel. So when I think about it now, it's wild because it was just the ultimate best case scenario. But it wasn't even on my radar because ESPN, they only make their content and they don't buy other people's content. And they didn't buy the film. They licensed it to broadcast. But they don't do that. That's like not, and so I didn't even think it was an option. And then they saw the film and they were like, oh, okay, no, we'd like to be a part of this, and like, hold on a second, let's find a way. And that was, so yeah, that was incredible. I mean, I cried a lot.
Are we able to still watch it on ESPN Plus or something like that? Or are there other platforms who could watch this documentary?
Right now, it's only available on the ESPN app, streaming wise. I think if people have Hulu Plus and Disney Plus accounts, they can log into that, or you need a cable provider. But it's been on the platform, and they said there will be more air dates, so they'll put it on TV a couple more times. It'll be hosted by ESPN until December, and then after that, we'll find a long-term home for it to be accessed. We'll figure that out when we get there.
Excellent. And for your journey, you've been moving from editor to directors. Is this something that you want to permanently do in the future, or do you just want to stick around in the editing background for a while?
Oh no, I want to do it all. Yeah, I love editing. I love editing, and I'm going to keep doing it when stories come across my email and my edit bay that I get excited about. But I've always wanted to direct, to be able to collect and drive a ship in the vision that I have for things that was always the dream. And as an editor, I do, especially in docs, I do feel a lot of creative control in the sense of I'm given hundreds of hours of footage and I find the story and then the director has a tone and, we talk about it. But to seek out stories and also to be out there in the field filming, I live in at my computer and people just ship me drives and then I'm just through screens. So to be out in the field was so thrilling. So I definitely want to keep directing. That is the dream. That is the fantasy. But I think I'll also edit and write. I mean, I'm one of those people that just has to do everything all the time or I'll lose my mind. So.
Well, this is going to circle to the last question here, but I know it's a silly time. It's silly times to ask a question like this. But are you working on upcoming projects for yourself, and do you want to stick into documentaries, or maybe possibly go into narratives down the road?
I mean, I definitely want to go into narrative as well, but I'll always love docs. I love them both. I actually just yesterday had a brainstorming session with my DP where we did deep dive on the Google to find some stories that we'd like to tell. And they were more female athletes. I mean, I think if I get typecasted as a director making stories about, badass women, I'll be very happy. I have no issue staying in this world. And so nothing official, but I'm definitely right now, building the pitches for what I'd like to do next. So it's in motion.
Excellent. And before I let before I let you go, I do have to. I was afraid to pronounce your name because I would have slaughtered. Is it Viridiana or something like that?
That
Or
was close. It's Viridiana.
oh, where is that from?
It's actually, I was named after a film. There's a famous film named Viridiana that my parents watched when I was born, and they liked that name. So they named me that. My sisters are like Anne and Amy and Melissa. Like, so when
Really?
they got to me, they got to me and they were like, yeah, Viridiana. My middle name is Bjorg, which my mother, who's Norwegian, it's her great. So they gave them all to me. I got all that, but I love it. But everybody just calls me Viri. But I was named after a film, so there feels some destiny in that DNA for sure.
Did you like the film?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wild film. It's got a cult following. It's I remember watching it going, shouldn't be my destiny. It's like a wild nun. But I do think it's got such a cult following, and so the essence of it and its rebellion and its style has always felt like, yeah, I'm with that.
Well, you know what? Your parents gave you a cool story, and that's what's actually important.
True that.
Well, hey, Viri, thank you very much for this conversation. Really appreciate it, and thankfully you got it on ESPN. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, and thanks for covering this. I appreciate it. Anything to boost the signal for the team and the sport is dream stuff. So thank you so much.
Hey, not a problem. Hey, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right.
Bye.